deeper and deeper into despair. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm wondering if you can even do it.
I'm David, I'm a creative coder, and I'm here today with one of my favorite people in the whole world.
Hi, I'm Michelle. These days I use code to make charts as a data journalist.
Michelle and I both went to Stanford together.
Look at David with his nice hair and beard. David's really cool. I'm hanging out with him.
And today, we want to share something that's kind of uncomfortable and that honestly we rarely talk about, even with each other. And that is this feeling of coding anxiety.
This feeling that I feel like I, at certain points, associated directly with coding, of stress, of feeling overwhelmed, like you're carrying too many things in your head, wondering if you can even do it, if you're even supposed to be here, sinking deeper and deeper into despair. I felt that a lot. Felt that like last Wednesday.
It's crazy for me to hear Michelle say this. First of all, because I thought I was the only person experiencing this, but second of all, because Michelle is one of the smartest, most capable people I have ever met. She's worked at some of the biggest names in tech. I hope this makes it as clear to you as it does to me that struggling is not about whether you belong in code. Today, we're gonna share things we've never talked about before and walk you through the drivers that make coding so challenging. That's learned helplessness, comparison, time pressure, and having a scared versus more of a detective's mindset. You're going to feel encouraged.
The first thing that I think of is like this experience of comparing myself to someone else and feeling like when I get stuck, I can't actually fix the problem at my hand and I need to rely on someone more experienced or just better than me.
Yeah, at my last job, I was the least experienced coder. I just kind of always felt like that was gonna be my place forever and like everyone else was miles ahead of me. And it sort of reinforces it. I'm like, oh, I'm not confident in myself, I'll rely on these other people. And I was learning a lot, but I always basically felt like I wasn't great. I didn't recognize how much I learned until I left that job, did a personal project on the side and started coding some stuff up and realizing, oh my gosh, I could not have done this a year ago. But because I was always comparing myself to the people around me, I had not experienced that feeling of like, wow, I've learned so much, I'm so amazing. I feel like there's this category of things that I just felt like I couldn't touch, that were like too hard for me to understand, like configuring the project and like Webpack. Then when I wasn't at that job anymore and I was just doing personal projects and I was like, oh, I need this to do XYZ. I need to like open the Webpack config file and like figure out how it works. And oh, it turns out I actually can understand how it works.
I know at your current job, you are one of the most talented programmers on the team, if not the most.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of sought that out a little bit. Sometimes it can just be helpful to be the smartest person in the room, whether that's being in a room by yourself or like being at a job where you're the most experienced and people like you have to figure out this thing because there's no one you can ask that knows it better than you.
And I think that one of the biggest factors that makes it hard, especially when you're learning or when you're in a company, is when you're feeling the time crunch.
I think time stress plays a big factor in the general stress around coding because it's like solving a complicated problem and you know that there's a deadline looming.
And I think we forget that like coding is really challenging. We're focused more on like, oh, what if I don't get it done in time?
And feeling like you're smarter or better if you can like do it faster. I feel like the solution to time stress is to not fall into the trap of doing things that you think will make you faster, but will actually probably make you slower.
One is like, I sort of hit a problem and I'll just Google it, grab the first answer Stack Overflow and paste it in. And I don't understand the code that I pasted in, but I just hope that it works.
Another thing is completely ignoring like good structure. I don't know, writing everything in one giant file because like you don't have time to open another file or something.
Part of what's going on for me in these moments is like, I'm getting more and more like physiologically anxious. And so there's less like energy put towards like that like sort of thinking slow part of my brain. And it's a vicious cycle.
Because the more you're in this place of despair, the more you are sort of delusional in hoping that maybe if you just like try it again, it'll work. I'll just change something and I'll be like, there's not really a good reason this would make it work, but like it's possible. And it would be really nice if it just worked right now. You're here in the hole of despair. Like if you really sat and thought thoughtfully about it, the answer might be start over. But like, you don't want to hear that. I just remind myself, sometimes it's faster to go slow.
But I think that one real thing for me is I often feel like my ego or just my sense of like needing to be good enough is really invested in hitting deadlines. And so like, if I told my boss, I'll have this done tomorrow and I'm nowhere to be done because I was trying to tell them like, I'm so stressed, like I'm sorry, so I'll try to go really fast. But in reality, like that was just making them even more confused about when I would actually be done.
even though I want the social reward of feeling like, oh yeah, I'll do it in an hour. Maybe I should just say I'll do it in 3 hours. And maybe it'll take me 2. And then I over-delivered. Great.
If my manager knows what she's doing, she'll know 2 things. Number 1, she knows that coding is unpredictable. Usually she's a coder herself.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, like my bosses definitely knew I was a new programmer. And so they expected me to like make mistakes and to struggle and to do really simple things over a long period of time. But in my head, I was like, they're so talented, they're expecting me to be as good as them. And that totally wasn't the case. It's not just about like having a time constraint, but it's about me thinking about like what my job is in that time constraint in my comparison to others. And I think that's like the final piece of this anxiety thing that we're missing, which is that I often like see coding as like, my job is to do it right, ideally the first time. And if it breaks, like I've failed at my job.
That totally makes sense as a way to think about it, especially if you've just got out of school and you get good grades for doing it right. But I think a shift in thinking, oh, debugging is a fundamental part of my job. I don't need to be ashamed of this, like, oh, I should be like doing it right, and instead I'm like debugging this. It's like, oh, like, no, I'm spending a couple hours debugging this thing because I'm solving hard problems.
As a programmer, unlike other jobs, your job is to take a totally unsolved new technical problem and fix it or build it, which is why programming is A, really hard, but also B, like eternally interesting.
Yeah, or I noticed the other day a coworker was shadowing me writing some code, and this coworker was a little less experienced at coding. A problem came up and I was kind of like, ooh, okay, interesting. Like, let's figure it out. And I could tell it kind of surprised her that I had that attitude towards it. Actually, I think I developed that from, I was taking improv and CS 107 at the same time, my sophomore year. Okay. CS 107 is like notoriously hard computer science class. Can't do it. And in improv, there's this game you do where you're like doing this like hand clapping exercise, and whenever you mess up, you're supposed to go, yay! And in CS 107, I developed this habit of whenever I got a seg fault, I'd be like, yay! Just to like stay sane. If you're gonna like be distressed every time that happens, like you're not gonna last very long, you know? Anyway, back to the other story. I had this sort of like fun energy towards this problem. I could tell my coworker was like, why are you doing that? But I just felt like my mindset was like, oh, I'm like a detective.
Sherlock is always like playing all these things in his head and like noticing details and picking up on stuff. And I think that when I'm in this scared mindset, this anxious mindset, I'm often just focused on like, oh, like line 3 broke. Like, what did I do wrong in line 3? Whereas when I'm a detective, I actually start to see the bigger picture, which often is where the problem actually lies.
I want to hear about how it feels for you to use a debugger.
I think like most programmers, I learned to debug a problem by finding wherever the bug occurred, and then a few lines before, I would just print out what I thought was causing the problem. And I think that's a bit like being a detective in the sense that maybe you go to a crime scene and there's like skid marks and like someone's dropped all these different items, and you kind of use that to trace what happened and kind of figure it out. But it's also a very narrow view. Very late in my coding career, discovered the debugger. It's kind of like if Sherlock Holmes could hear about a case and then literally travel to the scene where the action was happening and then freeze time and literally walk over and open people's purses and know exactly everything possible he could ever want to know, and then unfreeze time, play it forward, and stop it again. And that's what the debugger allows you to do. I think there's sort of this toxic view of programming, which is like, there are these like lone hackers, and she's just like so talented, and like nothing ever breaks. If it does, she just like fixes it, knows what to do. And there's actually an element to which we can celebrate failure, expect failure.
Normalize the failure, but don't just normalize like it's normal and it sucks. Like, it's normal and it can be like a joyful process. It's all a journey. We're still on it. Go forth, code, break stuff, make mistakes, celebrate those mistakes if you can find that in yourself.
And remember, no matter how much anxiety or joy you're feeling in any one moment, you're exactly where you should be. You're not alone. Onward.
I go ham all the time. You don't even know, you don't know my rhymes. Take it, David.
Yo, it's so crazy, amazing. I'm big as blazing.